The arena stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian stone, its walls rising toward a dome that could contain the fury of a dying star. 50,000 beings from across the Zephyrian Empire filled the crystalline viewing platforms, their various forms creating a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes against the dark architecture. The air hummed with anticipation and barely contained excitement as representatives from dozens of worlds gathered for the most prestigious event in known space. At the center of this magnificent coliseum stood a creature that had become legend throughout the galaxy. Korthak the Unyielding towered 4 meters above the arena floor, its midnight black scales reflecting the artificial suns that illuminated the space. Each scale was the size of a dinner plate, edges sharp enough to cut through reinforced steel. The Warbeast's 6 legs ended in claws that had carved furrows into the seemingly indestructible arena floor over countless battles. The creature's head resembled a fusion of apex predators from 1,000 different worlds. Rows of crystalline teeth caught the light like deadly prisms, while 4 eyes burned with an intelligence that made even hardened warriors step back in instinctive fear. Korthak's tail, thick as an ancient tree trunk, swept patterns in the sand that had been scattered across portions of the arena floor. The beast's breathing created small whirlwinds in the loose particles, each exhale a reminder of the raw power contained within that massive frame. Emperor Zekther observed from his elevated throne, his elongated form draped in robes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Zephyrian ruler's 3 eyes focused on the gathering below, satisfaction evident in his expression. For 700 cycles, Korthak had remained undefeated. Champions from every corner of the empire had tried to best the creature, and all had failed. Some had been torn apart within seconds. Others had lasted long enough to provide entertainment before meeting their inevitable end. The Warbeast served multiple purposes beyond mere spectacle. Each victory reinforced the empire's dominance, demonstrating to potentially rebellious worlds that Zephyrian military might extend beyond conventional weapons and starships. Korthak represented something primal and unstoppable, a force of nature that bent to imperial will. The psychological impact of the creature's continued victories had prevented more uprisings than entire fleet formations. Today's gathering included representatives from recently contacted worlds at the galaxy's edge, species that had yet to understand their place in the established order. The tournament served as both entertainment and education, showing newcomers exactly what they faced if they chose to oppose imperial authority. Most left with a healthy respect for Zephyrian power and a willingness to accept tributary status without further resistance. Ambassador Vexthal announced each competitor with practice ceremony, his voice amplified through crystalline resonators that carried every word to the furthest reaches of the arena. Warriors from the volcanic worlds of Pyrian Prime stepped forward first, their heat-resistant carapaces gleaming like polished copper. They carried traditional flame weapons that had served their kind for millennia, confident in abilities that had made them feared across their home sector. The Pyrian champion lasted 12 seconds. Korthak moved with impossible speed for something so massive, covering the distance between them before the warrior could properly activate his weapons. The crowd cheered as another challenger joined the growing list of the defeated, though the Warbeast showed no signs of fatigue or even mild exertion. Next came the crystalline monks of Zendar, beings who had achieved perfect harmony between matter and energy. Their champion floated 3 meters above the arena floor, surrounded by geometric patterns of pure light that could supposedly slice through any known material. The patterns were indeed beautiful, creating intricate mandalas that pulsed with otherworldly power. Korthak watched these displays with what might have been curiosity before demonstrating that raw physical force could overcome even the most sophisticated energy constructs. The monk managed to maintain his patterns for nearly a minute, longer than most challengers survived. But the inevitable conclusion remained unchanged. Korthak's hide proved impervious to the energy attacks, and the creature's patience was apparently infinite. When the monk's concentration finally wavered from exhaustion, the Warbeast struck with surgical precision, ending the contest without destroying the floating platform that had supported his opponent. As the day progressed, the crowd's enthusiasm grew with each victory. Representatives from 47 different worlds had brought their finest warriors, each convinced that their particular combination of skill, technology, or genetic enhancement would prove sufficient to claim victory. Veterans of 100 campaigns fell as quickly as fresh recruits, their experience meaning nothing against an opponent that seemed to exist outside conventional understanding of combat. The Hive Queens of Sector 7 sent their perfect soldier drones, creatures bred specifically for war across countless generations. These beings possessed reflexes that operated faster than conscious thought, allowing them to react to threats before their minds fully processed the danger. Against any conventional opponent, such advantages would prove decisive. Korthak was many things, but conventional was not among them. The soldier drones attacked in perfect coordination, their movements synchronized through biological quantum entanglement that allowed instantaneous communication across any distance. They struck from 6 directions simultaneously, using weapons that could adapt their molecular structure to exploit any perceived weakness in their target's defenses. For a moment, it appeared they might actually present a challenge to the Warbeast, their combined assault creating enough force to crack the arena floor itself. Korthak's response was simple and devastating. The creature spun in place, its massive tail creating a circular wave of destruction that caught all 6 attackers simultaneously. The soldier drone's perfect reflexes became their weakness as they all responded identically to the same threat, making their positions predictable rather than advantageous. Within seconds, the arena floor was clear again, and the crowd roared its approval. Emperor Zekthar allowed himself a rare smile of satisfaction. Each victory strengthened his position, demonstrating to potential rivals that challenging imperial authority was futile. The tournament served as more than entertainment. It was a carefully orchestrated display of power that reinforced the existing order throughout his vast domain. As the afternoon progressed toward evening, the announcements began including representatives from the galaxy's newest discoveries, worlds that had only recently achieved interstellar travel and were still adjusting to the reality of a vast cosmic community. Most of these civilizations sent token representatives, more to observe than to compete seriously. Their technologies and combat methods typically lagged centuries behind the established powers, making their participation largely ceremonial. Then, Ambassador Vexthal's voice carried across the arena with an announcement that caused murmurs of confusion throughout the assembled crowd. From the world called Earth, in a system known locally as Sol, we present their chosen representative. The murmurs grew louder as spectators consulted their data tablets, searching for information about this previously unknown civilization. Earth appeared in the records as a recent contact, a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in one of the galaxy's outer spiral arms. The planet supported a single intelligent species that had barely begun to explore their own solar system, let alone develop the technologies necessary for meaningful space travel. The confusion deepened when the human delegation's transport settled onto the arena's landing platform. Unlike the armored vehicles or energy constructs favored by other civilizations, the humans had arrived in what appeared to be a simple atmospheric shuttle, its design lacking any obvious weapons or defensive systems. The craft's hull showed signs of recent construction, suggesting these beings had built it specifically for this journey. 3 figures emerged from the shuttle, their forms immediately recognizable as the bipedal mammals that comprised Earth's dominant species. They moved with the confident stride of beings accustomed to their environment, though their physical capabilities appeared unremarkable compared to the enhanced warriors who had competed throughout the day. No visible weapons, no obvious genetic modifications, no technological augmentations that might explain their presence at such a gathering. The delegation consisted of 2 adults and what appeared to be a juvenile member of their species. The adults wore simple clothing that seemed designed more for comfort than protection, while the smaller figure was dressed in bright colors that created a stark contrast to the arena's dark architecture. They walked across the obsidian surface without apparent concern for the massive predator that waited at the space's center. Captain Sarah Chun led the human delegation, her steps measured and purposeful despite the alien environment surrounding them. She had volunteered for this mission knowing full well that Earth's first impression on the galactic community might depend entirely on the next few hours. The weight of representing her entire species pressed against her shoulders, but she maintained the calm demeanor that had served her well throughout her military career. Dr. Marcus Webb walked beside her, his scientific mind cataloging every detail of the arena's construction and the Warbeast's physical characteristics. As Earth's leading xenobiologist, he had studied every available record of previous tournaments, searching for patterns or weaknesses that might provide some advantage. His analyses had revealed several interesting possibilities, though nothing that guaranteed success against such a formidable opponent. Between them walked Luna Chun, Sarah's 8-year-old daughter, her presence at the tournament the result of circumstances that none of them had anticipated. The original plan had called for Earth's finest military specialists to represent their world, but a series of mechanical failures and Quarantine protocols had left only the three of them available when the tournament deadline arrived. Rather than forfeit their civilization's first opportunity to participate in galactic society, they had chosen to proceed with whatever resources remained available. Luna showed no signs of fear or intimidation as she observed the massive creature at the arena's center. Her young mind processed the Warbeast's appearance without the preconceptions that might limit an adult's understanding. Where others saw an unstoppable engine of destruction, she noticed behavioral patterns and body language that spoke of intelligence and possibly even loneliness. The crowd's reaction to the human delegation ranged from curiosity to outright dismissal. Many spectators assumed this was some form of elaborate joke, a way for the Empire to provide comic relief between serious competitions. The humans' small size and apparent lack of defensive capabilities suggested their participation would be brief and potentially tragic. Emperor Zekthar studied the newcomers with interest, though his expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. Intelligence reports on Earth described a species that had achieved remarkable things despite significant limitations, but their accomplishments seemed confined to their own world. They had developed sophisticated technologies, created complex social structures, and demonstrated a capacity for both cooperation and innovation that intrigued xenopsychologists throughout the Empire. However, none of these achievements seemed relevant to the immediate situation. The tournament required direct confrontation with Korthak, a creature that had defeated opponents possessing technologies and abilities far beyond anything Earth's primitive civilization could produce. The human's presence seemed destined to end in disappointment or worse. Ambassador Vexthal approached the human delegation, his towering form creating a shadow that encompassed all three figures. The diplomat had reviewed Earth's cultural files, attempting to understand the protocols these beings expected during formal interactions. Their customs appeared surprisingly complex for such a young civilization, emphasizing concepts like respect, dignity, and individual worth that many advanced species had abandoned as inefficient. Honored representatives of Earth, Vexthal began, his translator converting his words into the human's native language. The tournament requires that you designate a single champion to face Korthak. Which among your delegation will take on this responsibility? Captain Chun stepped forward, her military bearing evident despite the casual clothing she wore. I am prepared to represent my world in this competition, she replied, her voice carrying clearly across the arena's acoustic systems. However, I request permission to observe the creature's behavior patterns before beginning our encounter. The request surprised many observers, as previous challengers had typically entered combat immediately upon arriving. Korthak seemed equally puzzled by the delay, tilting its massive head to observe these strange newcomers who had not yet attempted to establish dominance or display threatening behaviors. Dr. Webb activated a small recording device, documenting Korthak's posture, movement patterns, and responses to various stimuli present in the arena environment. His scientific training demanded careful observation before drawing conclusions, even in circumstances where such methodical approaches might seem inappropriate. Luna wandered away from the adults, her natural curiosity drawing her closer to the Warbeast despite the obvious danger such proximity represented. She moved with the unconscious confidence of a child who had not yet learned to fear the world around her, each step bringing her nearer to a creature that had killed hundreds of trained warriors. The crowd's murmur grew to a concerned buzz as they watched the small human approach Korthak. Some spectators called out warnings, while others prepared to witness what they assumed would be a tragic demonstration of their species' naivety. Security personnel moved closer to the arena floor, ready to intervene if the situation escalated beyond acceptable parameters. Korthak lowered its massive head as Luna approached, bringing 4 burning eyes to approximately the same level as the child's face. The Warbeast's breathing created small dust clouds around her feet, each exhale carrying the scent of something ancient and wild. For a long moment, neither moved, creating a tableau that would be remembered long after the tournament's conclusion. Emperor Zekthar leaned forward in his throne, suddenly, aware that he was witnessing something unprecedented. In 700 cycles of tournaments, no challenger had ever approached Korthak without weapons ready or defensive systems activated. The human child seemed utterly unaware of her danger, standing within striking distance of claws that could tear through armored vehicles. The moment stretched toward infinity as 2 very different forms of intelligence studied each other across the vast divide of species, evolution, and experience. Luna's expression showed no fear, only the natural fascination of a young mind encountering something entirely new. Korthak's 4 eyes seemed to reflect that curiosity, as though the Warbeast was equally puzzled by this unprecedented encounter. Then, Luna reached out one small hand and touched the creature's snout, her palm resting against scales that had deflected energy weapons and molecular disruptors. The contact sent ripples of shock through the assembled crowd, many of whom had never seen anyone voluntarily touch a Warbeast without protective equipment. Korthak remained perfectly still, allowing the contact to continue as though frozen by some unprecedented experience. The creature's tail stopped its constant sweeping motion, and even its breathing seemed to quiet as it focused entirely on the small being who showed no fear of its terrible power. The arena fell silent as thousands of beings watched the impossible scene unfold before them. Luna's hand remained pressed against Korthak's snout, neither human nor Warbeast showing any inclination to break the connection. The moment stretched beyond normal comprehension, creating a pocket of absolute stillness within the vast space that had moments before echoed with the roars of combat and the cheers of spectators. Captain Chun felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched her daughter stand within striking distance of the galaxy's most feared predator. Every instinct screamed for her to rush forward and pull Luna to safety, but something in the tableau's strange serenity held her back. The Warbeast showed no signs of aggression or even mild irritation at the child's presumptuous contact. Dr. Webb's scientific instruments registered unprecedented readings from both participants in the unexpected interaction. Korthak's biorhythms had shifted into patterns he had never seen in any of the archived tournament footage. The creature's brain activity showed spikes consistent with complex cognitive processing, as though the Warbeast was actively analyzing this new experience rather than simply reacting to it. Emperor Zekther gestured sharply to his advisors, demanding explanations for what they were witnessing. The Imperial xenobiologists had studied Warbeasts for centuries, documenting every aspect of their behavior and capabilities. None of their research had suggested that these creatures possessed the capacity for such restrained curiosity, especially when confronted by potential prey in their territory. Ambassador Vexthal approached the arena floor cautiously, uncertain whether he should intervene or simply observe. The situation had moved far beyond normal tournament protocols, entering territory that none of the Empire's extensive bureaucracy had anticipated. His diplomatic training included procedures for handling unusual cultural customs, but nothing had prepared him for a scenario where a juvenile member of a primitive species would calmly pet the galaxy's most dangerous predator. Luna finally stepped back from Korthak, her expression showing the satisfied curiosity of a child who had successfully investigated something interesting. She turned toward her parents with a bright smile, apparently unaware of the profound impact her action had created throughout the arena. To her young mind, she had simply said hello to a large animal that seemed lonely and possibly in need of friendship. The Warbeast watched Luna's retreat with what appeared to be genuine interest rather than predatory focus. Korthak's head tracked her movement, but the creature made no attempt to follow or maintain the physical contact. Instead, the massive predator settled into a sitting position, its haunches lowering until it rested comfortably on the arena floor. This new development sent fresh waves of confusion through the assembled crowd. Korthak had never voluntarily lowered itself during a tournament, maintaining an aggressive stance throughout every previous competition. The creature's relaxed posture suggested a complete absence of hostile intent, as though the presence of the human child had somehow defused the Warbeast's natural aggression. Captain Chun seized the opportunity to join her daughter, moving across the arena floor with measured steps that avoided any gestures that might be interpreted as threatening. Her military experience had taught her to recognize when situations required caution over courage, and everything about this moment demanded careful consideration rather than bold action. "Luna," she called softly as she approached. "Come back over here, sweetheart." The little girl skipped toward her mother, her natural exuberance undimmed by the extraordinary circumstances surrounding them. "Mom, did you see? He's really smart and I think he's been sad for a long time. Nobody ever talks to him nicely." The simplicity of Luna's observation cut through the complex political and military considerations that dominated adult thinking about the tournament. From her perspective, she had encountered a lonely creature that responded positively to kind treatment. The fact that this creature could tear apart armored vehicles was irrelevant to her assessment of its emotional state. Dr. Webb activated additional sensors, documenting the continuing changes in Korthak's behavior and physiology. The Warbeast's stress hormones had dropped to levels consistent with relaxation rather than combat readiness. Even more significantly, the creature's brain activity showed patterns that suggested active communication attempts rather than predatory calculations. "Sarah," he called to Captain Chun, "I'm reading massive changes in the creature's neurochemistry. Whatever Luna did, it's triggered responses that I've never seen in any Warbeast documentation." Emperor Zekthar rose from his throne, his three eyes focused intently on the scene below. 700 cycles of tournaments had followed predictable patterns, with Korthak's behavior remaining consistent throughout countless battles. The creature had been bred and trained for one purpose: to demonstrate imperial dominance through overwhelming force. This unprecedented display of restraint challenged fundamental assumptions about Warbeast nature and capabilities. The crowd's murmur had evolved into active discussion as spectators debated what they were witnessing. Representatives from various worlds consulted their data tablets, searching for precedents or explanations that might make sense of the situation. The humans' reputation as a primitive species made their apparent success even more confusing to observers who had witnessed the failures of far more advanced civilizations. Ambassador Vexthal reached the arena floor and approached the human delegation carefully, his diplomatic protocols strained by circumstances that existed outside normal frameworks. "Honored representatives," he began, "the tournament requires active competition between designated champions. Are you prepared to proceed with formal combat?" Captain Chun looked at her daughter, then at the relaxed Warbeast that continued to watch them with apparent interest rather than hostility. The situation had moved far beyond anything their mission briefings had prepared them for, entering territory that required real-time adaptation rather than predetermined strategies. "Ambassador," she replied carefully, "I believe we may need to reconsider the nature of this competition. Our initial observations suggest that traditional combat approaches may not be appropriate for our particular circumstances." The diplomat's confusion was evident in his body language as he struggled to interpret this response. Earth's cultural files had described humans as a species that often sought alternative solutions to conflict, but the tournament structure seemed to preclude non-violent approaches. Korthak existed to fight, and challengers were expected to either defeat the creature or be defeated themselves. Dr. Webb moved closer to share his findings with both Captain Chun and Ambassador Vexthal, his scientific instruments providing data that challenged conventional understanding of the situation. "The creature's biological responses indicate complex social recognition patterns," he explained. "It's not reading Luna as prey or threat, but as something entirely different." Luna had wandered back toward Korthak during the adults' conversation, drawn by the same curiosity that had initially led her to approach the Warbeast. The creature lowered its head again as she came near, allowing her to examine the intricate patterns etched into its scales. Each scale bore markings that seemed almost like writing, though no human language could interpret their meaning. "Look at all these pictures," Luna called to her parents, pointing at the markings. "It's like he's got stories written all over him." This observation prompted Dr. Webb to activate his translation algorithms, analyzing the scale patterns for linguistic significance. The results were immediately intriguing, as the markings showed structural complexity consistent with symbolic communication rather than random decorative elements. If Luna was correct, Korthak's scales might contain actual information rather than simple biological features. The implications were staggering. If Warbeasts possessed their own language or record-keeping system, it suggested levels of intelligence and cultural development that imperial scientists had never suspected. The creatures had been treated as sophisticated biological weapons rather than potentially sapient beings with their own social structures and communication methods. Emperor Zekthar activated his private communication system, demanding immediate consultation with the Empire's leading xenobiologists and military strategists. If Warbeasts possessed hidden intelligence, it could fundamentally alter the balance of power throughout the galaxy. The creatures served as more than tournament champions. They provided security for critical imperial installations and served as mobile deterrents against rebellious populations. Meanwhile, Luna continued her examination of Korthak's scales, her young eyes picking out patterns and details that escaped adult attention. The Warbeast remained perfectly still, allowing her investigation to proceed without interference. Occasionally, the creature would adjust its position slightly to provide her with better access to particular areas, as though actively participating in her exploration. "Mom, I think he wants to show me something," Luna announced, pointing toward a section of scales near Korthak's shoulder. These marks are different from the others. They look like they're trying to tell me something important. Captain Chun approached cautiously, her protective instincts warring with genuine curiosity about what her daughter had discovered. The scale patterns in the indicated area did appear distinct from surrounding markings, forming geometric shapes that seemed more purposeful than the organic designs elsewhere on the creature's hide. Dr. Webb focused his translation equipment on the specific markings Luna had identified, running them through every linguistic database available to Earth's diplomatic mission. The initial results were inconclusive, but several patterns emerged that suggested mathematical or navigational significance rather than purely decorative function. The crowd's attention had shifted from confusion to fascination as they watched the unprecedented interaction between human and Warbeast. Many spectators had witnessed dozens of tournaments, but none had ever seen a challenger examining their opponent's physical features as though conducting scientific research rather than preparing for combat. Ambassador Vexthal found himself in the unprecedented position of moderating a situation that existed outside all established protocols. The tournament's rules required active competition, but the current circumstances seemed to preclude traditional combat approaches. Neither human nor Warbeast showed any inclination toward violence, creating a stalemate that the imperial bureaucracy had never anticipated. Honored representatives, he tried again. The tournament's schedule requires resolution of each competition within specified timeframes. How do you propose to proceed with your challenge? Captain Chun considered the question carefully, aware that her answer might determine humanity's future relationship with the galactic community. Earth's first impression on the Empire would establish precedents that could influence their civilization's development for centuries to come. Ambassador, she replied, I believe we may be witnessing something more significant than a simple tournament competition. If Dr. Webb's analyses are correct, we may need to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the nature of these creatures. The suggestion that imperial xenobiologists might have misunderstood Warbeast intelligence sent ripples of concern through the elevated viewing platforms. Representatives from various worlds began consulting with their own scientific advisors, seeking explanations for the unprecedented behaviors they were observing. Luna had moved to a position near Korthak's massive head, where she could examine the markings around the creature's eyes more closely. These scales bore the most complex patterns she had yet encountered, forming intricate spirals and geometric shapes that seemed to pulse with their own internal logic. He's trying to talk to me, she announced with the matter-of-fact certainty that only children could muster. I think he's been trying to talk to everyone, but nobody ever listened. This statement struck at the heart of everything the tournament represented. For 700 cycles, the Empire had treated warbeasts as magnificent but ultimately mindless predators, creatures to be controlled and directed rather than communicated with. If Luna was correct, they had been systematically ignoring attempts at communication from beings that possessed their own intelligence and awareness. Dr. Webb's instruments detected increasing complexity in Korthak's brain activity, particularly in regions associated with language processing and social interaction. The creature appeared to be actively attempting communication, using methods that had been invisible to previous researchers because no one had thought to look for them. The warbeast began to emit low-frequency sounds that were barely audible to human ears but registered clearly on the scientific equipment. These sounds showed structural patterns consistent with linguistic communication, suggesting that Korthak was indeed attempting to establish meaningful dialogue with its unusual visitors. Luna tilted her head as though listening to something the adults couldn't hear, her expression showing the focused concentration of someone trying to understand a complex message. She nodded occasionally, as though responding to communications that remained invisible to everyone else in the arena. I think I understand some of it, she said finally. He's telling me about other places and other people like him. They're not mean at all. They just want to go home. The implications of Luna's statement hit the assembled observers like a physical blow. If warbeasts possessed their own civilization, their own concept of home, then the Empire's treatment of them constituted something far worse than simple exploitation. They might have been enslaving sapient beings for centuries, forcing them to fight in tournaments for the entertainment of their captors. Emperor Zekthar's expression had shifted from satisfaction to deep concern as the situation's implications became clear. The Empire's power structure depended partly on the psychological impact of warbeast dominance. But that dominance was meaningless if the creatures were unwilling participants rather than loyal servants. Captain Chun realized that this moment might represent humanity's most important contribution to galactic civilization. Earth's young species might possess capabilities that older civilizations had lost or never developed, abilities that could fundamentally change the relationship between different forms of life throughout the galaxy. "Luna," she called softly, "ask him if he wants to stop fighting." The little girl looked up at Korthak's massive head, her expression serious as she considered how to communicate such a complex concept. She reached out to touch the creature's snout again, maintaining physical contact as she spoke in soft tones that carried clearly in the arena's silence. "Do you want to go home instead of fighting?" she asked simply. The Warbeast's response was immediate and unmistakable. Korthak's entire body seemed to relax further, and the creature emitted a series of sounds that required no translation to understand. The relief and longing in those vocalizations spoke to something universal, transcending species barriers to communicate emotions that any intelligent being could recognize. The arena erupted in chaos as the implications became clear to everyone present. Representatives from dozens of worlds began heated discussions about the ethical and political ramifications of what they had witnessed. The tournament's fundamental purpose had been challenged by the simple compassion of a human child who had treated a feared predator as a fellow intelligent being deserving of respect and kindness. Ambassador Vexthal found himself facing a diplomatic crisis that threatened to reshape the Empire's relationship with every subordinate civilization. If warbeasts were indeed sapient beings held against their will, then the tournament system represented a form of slavery that would outrage many of the Empire's more ethically minded member species. Luna stepped back from Korthak and turned toward the viewing platforms, her young voice somehow carrying to every corner of the vast arena. "He says all of them want to go home. They never wanted to fight anybody. They just want to see their families again." The silence that followed her words was absolute, as though the entire galaxy had paused to consider the weight of what she had revealed. In the space of a few minutes, a human child had accomplished what centuries of imperial policy had failed to achieve. She had given voice to beings who had been forced into silence, creating a bridge between species that might reshape the future of galactic civilization. The weight of Luna's revelations settled over the arena like a physical presence, creating an atmosphere charged with possibilities that no one had imagined when the day began. Emperor Zekthar sat frozen on his throne, three eyes fixed on the small human child who had just challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying his entire empire's power structure. Captain Chun moved protectively closer to her daughter, acutely aware that they had stumbled into something far more significant than a simple tournament competition. Luna's innocent approach had uncovered truths that could destabilize governments and reshape alliances throughout the galaxy. The little girl remained oblivious to these larger implications, focused entirely on the massive creature that had somehow captured her complete attention. Korthak lifted his great head and surveyed the arena's viewing platforms, for burning eyes taking in the assembled representatives of dozens of worlds. For the first time in 700 cycles of tournaments, the Warbeast's gaze held intelligence rather than mere predatory calculation. The change was subtle but unmistakable, transforming him from a magnificent animal into something recognizably sentient. Dr. Webb's instruments registered the creature's shifting biorhythms as Korthak apparently made some internal decision. The Warbeast's stress hormones had dropped to levels consistent with calm determination rather than combat readiness. Even more significantly, brain activity showed patterns suggesting complex strategic thinking rather than simple reactive responses. The crowd's murmur had evolved into active debate as representatives from various civilizations struggled to process what they had witnessed. Delegates from worlds that prided themselves on ethical governance found themselves questioning whether their participation in the tournament system made them complicit in what might constitute systematic oppression of sapient beings. Ambassador Vexthal stood paralyzed by diplomatic uncertainty, aware that his next actions could influence the Empire's stability for generations to come. The tournament system served multiple purposes beyond entertainment, functioning as a demonstration of imperial power that helped maintain order throughout the vast territory under Zephyrian control. If that system collapsed, the political ramifications would extend far beyond this single arena. Luna looked up at Korthak with the direct, uncomplicated gaze that only children could maintain when addressing complex situations. Her young mind had cut through centuries of imperial propaganda and military doctrine to focus on the essential truth that others had somehow overlooked. The creature before them was not a weapon or a tool, but a person trapped in circumstances beyond his control. "What's your real name?" she asked the Warbeast, her voice carrying clearly in the arena's acoustics. "Korthak sounds like what people call you when they're being mean." The creature's response came as a series of complex vocalizations that resonated through subsonic frequencies, creating harmonics that seemed to vibrate through the arena's structure itself. Dr. Webb's translation algorithm struggled with the sounds, identifying linguistic patterns but lacking cultural context to interpret their meaning. However, Luna nodded as though she understood perfectly. "That's a beautiful name," she said seriously.
"Im Luna."
"It means moon in my language, because my mom says I'm bright even in dark places." This exchange prompted Dr. Webb to recalibrate his equipment, focusing on frequencies that human ears might detect but Imperial technology had overlooked. The results were immediately revealing, as Korthak's vocalizations showed clear structural patterns consistent with sophisticated language rather than simple animal communication. The implications struck the assembled observers with growing force. If warbeasts possessed their own names, their own concept of identity separate from Imperial designations, then they were undeniably persons rather than property. The tournament system would be transformed from entertainment into something approaching gladiatorial slavery, a comparison that would horrify many of the Empire's member civilizations. Emperor Zekther activated his private communication channels, demanding immediate consultation with the Empire's most senior advisors. The situation had moved far beyond normal diplomatic protocols, entering territory that could threaten the fundamental legitimacy of Imperial governance. If subject worlds began questioning the Empire's treatment of potentially sapient beings, it might encourage broader resistance to Zephyrian authority. Captain Chun realized that her daughter had inadvertently positioned Earth at the center of what might become the galaxy's most significant political crisis in centuries. Humanity's first contact with galactic civilization had evolved from a simple cultural exchange into a potential catalyst for revolutionary change across dozens of star systems. "Luna," she said carefully, "can you ask him about other creatures like himself? Are there more of them who want to go home?" The little girl turned back to Korthak, her expression showing the serious concentration of someone tasked with an important responsibility. She placed her hand against the creature's snout again, maintaining physical contact that seemed to facilitate their unusual communication. The warbeast's response was immediate and profound. Korthak began vocalizing in patterns that grew increasingly complex, creating what could only be described as narrative structures. Dr. Webb's instruments detected emotional resonances within the sounds, suggesting that the creature was sharing experiences rather than simply conveying factual information. Luna listened intently, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy or understanding that seemed to encourage.